The whole world was shocked by the sudden death of Matthew Perry, remembered for his role as Chandler in one of the most iconic series of all times, Friends. However, few know that his life was marked by a tough battle against addictions, which led him to face a medical complication with only a 2% chance of survival. This is the story of Matthew Perry, a man who struggled for years against his demons until he couldn't take it anymore. Friends is one of the most successful series out there, even if it is not to everyone's taste. It is undeniable that it left a deep mark on popular culture, achieving unprecedented fame worldwide thanks to its funny stories of friendship, love, and survival in adult life. However, behind the scenes, it was not all laughter and joy. Matthew Perry, the actor who gave life to Chandler, the witty, sarcastic, and charismatic of the group, faced serious personal problems during much of his existence, sustaining a constant struggle with his addictions that affected his life drastically inside and outside the series. During the first 2 seasons, everything was going great. The series was already a global phenomenon that had captured the attention of millions of people who identified with its endearing characters and the funny situations they faced. Its impact was such that by the time the second season ended in 1996, Friends was already among the top 5 series with the highest ratings, along with titans like ER and Seinfeld. In 1997, while filming the 3rd season of Friends, Matthew was filming the comedy An Impulsive and Crazy Love. It was during this production that an unexpected event occurred that completely transformed his life. Perry was involved in a jet ski accident, and his doctor prescribed Vicodin to alleviate the pain. At first glance, it could be said that it was from that moment when her addiction problems began. But the reality is that underneath the smile that she showed at all times during the set of Friends made both the rest of the cast and the entire staff laugh. The actor had been struggling with internal conflicts for more than a decade, which would eventually take their toll. Matthew was born in 1968 in Massachusetts, but grew up in Ottawa, Canada. It was there that he tried alcohol for the first time at age 14, never imagining that it would lead to 2 future emergency room visits, one of them so severe that he had only a 2% chance of survival. At 15, he moved to Los Angeles with the dream of becoming an actor, so he enrolled in acting school, studied improvisation, and began landing small roles in various series, usually with 1-episode appearances. It wasn't until 1987, when he was 18, that he landed a lead role playing Chaz Russell in the series Second Chance, a comedy revolving around a man who dies in the year 2011. And, upon arriving before St. Peter decides that he's not bad enough for hell, but not good enough to go to heaven either. Therefore, he gives him the opportunity to return to Earth in 1987 to find himself when he was still a teenager, nicknamed Chaz, in order to guide him to make better decisions in his life. How ironic to think that if something similar had happened to Matthew, perhaps his life would not have been marked by so many difficulties. Even so, the show only lasted 1 season. In the following years, he obtained relevant roles in the series Sydney and Home Free, although neither managed to consolidate, since both were canceled after their first season. By this point in his life, Matthew had been drinking functionally for a decade. Up to that point, alcohol had not interfered in his career or in his personal life. However, the actor himself confessed that, after some party where he drank with friends, he used to continue drinking alone at home. Finally, in 1994, he got the most important role of his life playing Chandler, and with that, he achieved everything he had always longed for, and even much more. In his own words, it was like being in Disneyland, at least for the first 8 months, because after that, he realized that it didn't really fill any of the holes he had in his life. He didn't know how to handle all that fame, and at the same time, he was under enormous pressure to stay funny, as if his life depended on making others laugh. He felt that his value as a person was tied to pleasing the world through humor. In some ways, it seemed that Matthew and Chandler were becoming more and more alike in that respect, although in time, their paths would take completely opposite directions. He felt extremely lonely, and even more so because he still kept his drinking problem a secret. But once he started using opioids, it became almost impossible to disguise. Although he claimed to feel better than he ever had in his life, he was sinking deeper and deeper into the clutches of addiction. Despite being one of the most recognized and highest-paid actors of his time, he resorted to desperate methods to obtain more pills, inventing different symptoms in front of 8 different doctors. On Sundays, he would go to open house to sneak into the bathrooms and steal the pills he stole from the cabinets. He reached a point where he was consuming 55 pills a day. Although he claimed not to be under the influence of Vicodin or alcohol during filming, he would show up on set with clear signs of a hangover. His co-stars were seriously concerned about him, and when confronted, Perry asked them in surprise how they knew. They told him they could smell the alcohol. He agreed to check himself into a rehabilitation center for the first time in 1997, where he spent 28 days. Sadly, however, he did not manage to stay sober for long. He was in and out of rehab. For the next few years, at all times he had the support of his friends, although they knew that nothing they said would make a difference if he did not make the decision to change himself. A fundamental part of rehab programs is anonymity, something Matthew could not have, as the media constantly exposed his addiction problems. At that time, it was unusual to see actors entering rehab, much less a celebrity as recognized as Perry was. During this time, he began to have noticeable changes in his physique. He weighed only 58 kilograms at its most critical moment. According to Matthew, when he looked very thin, it was due to the use of opioids. And when he was overweight, it was because of alcohol. In an interview in 2022, when watching a fragment of Friends, where he appeared under the effect of opioids, he confessed that it was very hard for him to see himself in that state, because he felt a strange compassion for that man, a man out of control who did not understand what was happening with him. Somehow or another, Matthew was ingesting some substance to fill a void that all the fame in the world couldn't fill. At the end of filming the last episode of Season 7, when Chandler and Monica get married, one of the happiest moments for the character, ironically, Matthew was going through one of the darkest stages of his life. That same day, as soon as he left the set, he was taken directly to a detox center. In 2000, he suffered from pancreatitis, an extremely painful and life-threatening condition caused by alcohol and opioid abuse. To top it off, the same day he left the hospital, Matthew crashed his car straight into a fortunately empty house. He wasn't even under the effects at that moment, which made it clear how much control he had lost. Our protagonist was really hitting rock bottom, and the saddest thing was that it was all being exposed in the media. It was then that Matthew decided to call his parents for help. He claims that he didn't want to get sober just because he had to, but because he felt that if he didn't, he was going to die. So, in 2001, while filming the 7th season of Friends, Matthew entered a rehabilitation center with the full support of the production, who adjusted the schedule so he could go from the center to the set, and vice versa. During the 2.5 months he was hospitalized, Matthew stayed sober. During the last years of the series, and probably thanks to all that support, it was in the 9th season, for the first time in the entire series, that Matthew was nominated for an Emmy for Best Actor in a Comedy, something that seemed to motivate him to stay sober. Once Friends came to an end in 2004, Perry starred in several films and series. Although none of those projects reached the fame of Friends, he was still facing his struggle with addiction, and unfortunately had several relapses along the way. However, the media were no longer as aware of his life as they were previously, so during those years, he did not have as much media presence. It was not until 2011 that his return to rehab was made public, although this time, he did so preemptively. In his own words, "I'm planning to take a month off to focus on my sobriety and continue to move forward in my recovery process." From then on, Matthew seemed to have a little more control over the way his struggle with addiction was exposed. Taking advantage of the platform of his fame to destigmatize addiction, he spoke frankly and honestly about the problems he faced during his life. Although it was not a topic he was happy to address, he knew that by doing so, he could help others going through similar situations. For Matthew, providing support to others gave him strength and a sense of purpose, something he felt he lacked in the past. In 2013, he transformed his mansion in Malibu into a sobriety center he named Perry House, thus cementing his commitment to staying sober. He was also an active part of 12-step programs, and was even encouraged to face the trauma of the accident he experienced more than a decade ago, when he was spotted in Cabo, Mexico, on a jet ski. In 2015, he was recognized for his work in the fight against addiction. Perry was beginning to see a light at the end of the tunnel, putting an incredible positive spin on his life. However, in 2018, he was urgently admitted after suffering a perforated colon, caused by years of substance abuse. The situation was so critical that doctors gave him just a 2% chance of survival that night, but Matthew didn't give up. He spent 2 weeks in a coma and 5 months hospitalized. He couldn't move or even speak. The shame, loneliness, and remorse were too much to bear, confessed the actor, who, despite making it out alive, felt angry. He did not understand why he had survived, when any doctor would say that someone in his condition would not make it. So he took it as a sign that he should focus even more on the cause, and with the desire to help as many people as possible. On November 1st, 2022, Matthew publishes his book, Friends, Lovers, and That Terrible Thing, an autobiography in which he recounts in great detail his struggles with addiction, his personal life, his relationships, and his time on the series Friends. He knew that there were many people suffering in silence, and he wanted them to understand that they were not alone, that just like him, they could seek the right help and begin to heal. "No matter how low I have fallen, I will always be able to help someone who's down there with me," he had once said. He toured the United States promoting his book, and all indications were that Perry had finally taken charge of his life. However, less than a year after its publication, an unexpected tragedy would put an end to his story. At the age of 54, on October 28, 2023, Matthew was found lifeless in the hot tub of his Los Angeles home. The paramedics who arrived at the scene determined that he suffered a natural cardiac arrest, but the toxicology report reveals that he suffered an overdose of ketamine. Prior to this tragic event, the actor was undergoing ketamine infusion therapy, a modern treatment used to combat anxiety and depression. However, the forensic report confirmed that the amount of ketamine present in his body was excessive, and that this was the direct cause of the cardiac arrest. Matthew himself had warned during his lifetime, you can't have an addiction problem for 30 years and expect it to be solved in 28 days. His departure left an immense void and moved the whole world, because despite the actor's openness about his personal life, one does not really end up fully dimensioning the problems a person is going through. Throughout his life, Matthew was in rehab 15 times and went through detoxification programs more than 65 times. It was a painful and costly road, but he had the resources and unconditional support of his family and friends. Still, Perry himself admitted that addiction was a battle he would have to fight for the rest of his life. And that leaves a great reflection. What about people who face the same thing, but without means or support network, and do not have the economic resources or the core of support that Matthew had? And that is where a big difference lies. When someone close to us shows signs of struggling with an addiction, we often opt for silence, thinking that it is not our place, or that they will change on their own. But the truth is that companionship and conversation can make all the difference. It's not about judging, but about being present, reaching out as so many did with Matthew, even though he was a public figure. Everyone deserves that chance to be heard and helped, because sometimes what someone needs most is not an immediate solution, but simply to feel that they are not alone. A message, a call, a heartfelt conversation can become that little nudge that reminds them that there is still hope. Just as Matthew found strength in the support of others, we can all be that light for someone else. It's not about carrying their process, but walking alongside them, reminding them that their life matters, that their story matters, and that they can still write a new chapter.